late November, there's usually snow on it. And last year I tried this a few times early in the season, and there was 2.5 feet of snow on the road. So it made it really hard, actually. Yeah. And I tried coming it over it a year ago last November, and it was the closest I ever came to totally crashing my car out in the middle of nowhere. It was really, really intense. I have a Subaru, and it's, 4-wheel drive and stuff, but it doesn't do any very well in 2.5 feet of snow with deep ruts, right? It was really bad. Yeah. So yeah, it's an amazing area, and it's quite beautiful, actually. That part of the Mendocino National Forest, and 7,000 feet is pretty high. So yeah.
You'll feel it.
I definitely will feel it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the highest I've ever ridden up on my bike is Onion Valley, up above Independence in the Great Basin. And that's, I want to say 9,000 or something like that. There's a little road that goes up to it, which is, it's a famous bike climb, basically. People come from, across the country to do it. And it's not even all that long. It's just that it's, the Sierras from the Great Basin are really beautiful. So should we start up the live streaming thing?
It's going.
Is it? Oh, and here I am blathering away. Sorry. Well, let's sit for a while, and I'll read the Fukanza Zengi once we've gotten kicked off, and maybe I'll give a couple of minor pieces of instruction that aren't in the Fukanza Zengi as well, just for fun. So. So we were talking last week about the breath and the hara, and this is a good time to dip into that a little bit. So just to, as you sit, notice that spot a couple inches below your navel, right in the middle of your body. That's the bottom of your breathing apparatus, right? And keep your attention there. Maybe bring on the out breath, as we were saying last week. Bring a little tension to your lower stomach muscles, and a little tension to your pelvic floor, and then let the breath fall all the way out of the body. The sensation is that the breath falls into the hara on the out breath. And then pause, wait till your diaphragm tells you it's time to breathe in. And then keep your attention in your hara. Just breathe from there, but allow the tension, any tension you have there, to relax, and allow the breath to flood in. And fill your body, support your posture. On the out breath, tension in the upper body sort of collapses into the hara with the breath. And on the in-breath, the in-breath supports and enlivens the posture. So you can start being pretty deliberate about that, maybe the first 3 to 5 breaths. And then let your breath settle into its natural rate and depth, but sort of keep that cycle going and keep the attention in your heart if you can. Allow your head to float up and back, which naturally opens the throat and allows the breath even more room to move in and out. Let your chin rest gently on these two big slabs of muscles that run around or sort of under your lower jaw. And let it rest there lightly. Don't press it down. Don't let that part of your face be completely relaxed. So here's what Dogen says about it. The way is basically perfect and all-pervading. How could it be contingent upon practice and realization? The Dharma vehicle is free and untrammeled. What need is there for concentrated effort? Indeed, the whole body is far beyond the world's dust. Who could believe in a means to brush it clean? It's never apart from one, right where one is. What's the use of going off here and there to practice? And yet, if there is the slightest discrepancy, the way is as distant as heaven from earth. If the least like or dislike arises, the mind is lost in confusion. Suppose one gains pride of understanding, or inflates one's own enlightenment, glimpsing the wisdom that runs through all things, attaining the way and clarifying the mind, raising an aspiration to escalade the very sky. One is making the initial partial excursions about the frontiers, but is still somewhat deficient in the vital way of total emancipation. Need I mention the Buddha, who was possessed of inborn knowledge? The influence of his 6 years of upright sitting is noticeable still. Or Bodhidharma's transmission of the mind seal. The fame of his 9 years of wall sitting is celebrated to this day. Since this was the case with the saints of old, how can we today dispense with negotiation of the way? You should therefore cease from practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words and following after speech, and learn the backward step that turns your light inwardly to illuminate yourself. Body and mind of themselves will drop away, and your original face will be manifest. If you want to attain suchness, you should practice suchness without delay. For Sanzen, a quiet room is suitable. Eat and drink moderately, cast aside all involvements and cease all affairs. Do not think good or bad. Do not administer pros and cons. Cease all movements of the conscious mind, the gauging of all thoughts and views. Have no designs on becoming a Buddha. Sanzen has nothing whatever to do with sitting or lying down. At the side of your regular sitting, spread out thick matting and place a cushion above it. Sit either in the full lotus or half lotus position. In the full lotus position, you first place your right foot on your left thigh and your left foot on your right thigh. In the half lotus, you simply press your left foot against your right thigh. You should have your robes and belt loosely bound and arranged in order. Then place your right hand on your left leg and your left palm facing upward on your right palm, thumb tips touching. Thus sit upright in correct bodily posture, neither inclining to the left nor to the right, neither leaning forward nor backward. Be sure your ears are on a plane with your shoulders and your nose in line with your navel. Place your tongue against the front roof of your mouth with teeth and lips both shut. Your eyes should always remain open and you should breathe gently through your nose. Once you've adjusted your posture, take a deep breath. Inhale and exhale. Rock your body right and left and settle into a steady, immovable sitting position. Think of not thinking. How do you think of not thinking? Non-thinking. This in itself is the essential art of Zazen. The Zazen I speak of is not learning meditation. It's simply the Dharma gate of repose and bliss. The practice realization of totally culminated enlightenment. It is the manifestation of ultimate reality. Traps and snares can never reach it. Once its heart is grasped, you're like a dragon gaining the water, like a tiger taking to the mountains. For you must know that just there, the right Dharma is manifesting itself, and that from the very first, dullness and distraction are struck aside. When you arise from sitting, move slowly and quietly, calmly and deliberately. Don't rise suddenly or abruptly. In surveying the past, we find that transcendence of both unenlightenment and enlightenment and dying while either sitting or standing have all depended entirely on the strength of Zazen. In addition to bringing about enlightenment by the opportunity provided by a finger, a banner, a needle, or a mallet, And the effecting of realization with the aid of a hosu, a fist, a staff, or a shout, cannot be fully understood by discriminative thinking. Indeed, it cannot be fully known by the practicing or realizing of supernatural powers either. It must be deportment beyond hearing and seeing. Is it not a principle that's prior to knowledge and perception? This being the case, intelligence or lack of it does not matter. Between the dull and the sharp-witted, there is no distinction. If you concentrate your efforts single-mindedly, that in itself is negotiating the way. Practice realization is naturally undefiled. Going forward in practice is a matter of everydayness. In general, this world and other worlds as well, both in India and China, equally hold the Buddha seal. And overall prevails the character of this school, which is simply devotion to sitting, total engagement in immobile sitting. Although it is said that there are as many minds as there are persons, still they all negotiate the way solely in zazen. Why leave behind the seat that exists in your home and go aimlessly off to the dusty realms of other lands? If you make one misstep, you go astray from the way directly before you. You've gained the pivotal opportunity of human form. Do not use your time in vain. You are maintaining the essential working of the Buddha way. Who would take wasteful delight in the spark from the flintstone? Besides, form and substance are like the dew on the grass, destiny like the dart of lightning, emptied in an instant, vanished in a flash. Please, honored followers of Zen, long accustomed to groping for the elephant, do not be suspicious of the true dragon. Devote your energies to a way that directly indicates the absolute. Revere the person of complete attainment who is beyond all human agency. Gain accord with the enlightenment of the Buddhas and succeed to the legitimate lineage of the ancestors' samadhi. Constantly perform in such a manner, and you are assured of being a person such as they. Your treasure store will open of itself, and you will use it at will. So let's do, in order to make it easy to set for the next, I don't know, while. Why don't we do some seated stretches? I think we've done some of these, but so these are stretches that you can do really whenever you sit down as a way of kind of stretching out the body and settling the posture. So let's try some twists. So put your right palm on your left knee, run your left arm around behind your back, sit up straight, as straight as possible, your head sort of climbing towards the ceiling, and then twist around to the left and look over your left shoulder. And obviously remember to breathe while you're doing this. Okay, the other side. Left palm on the right knee, right arm around behind the back, sit up straight, twist around to the right and look over your right shoulder. Depending on your lower body posture, this will feel different on one side than the other, or not, depending on how you're sitting. Just notice the difference. Notice what it's stretching out. Notice if there's any discomfort and be careful with that. All right, so come around to the center. So let's try this. Put your hand, your right palm on the top of your head, and gently and slowly pull your head towards your right shoulder. And I really mean gently. So that you start to feel, if you relax your left arm, you can feel a stretch that runs all the way down your left arm into the floor, basically. But it's a soft stretch. You don't want to overdo this. Then put your right palm under your temple and gently push your head back up to upright. And when you're settled there, rest for a second. Feel what happened with the stretch in your right shoulder and arm. And then put your left shoulder and arm. Sorry about that. Put your left arm, left hand on the top of your head and do the same thing on the other side. Gently pull your head towards your left shoulder, allowing your right arm to stretch out, feeling the stretch through your shoulder. Both my shoulders are broken and I feel this a lot. Okay, put your left hand under your temple and push your head up to upright. And then one last thing. This is useful for sort of getting your back aligned when you're about to sit for half hour, 40 minutes. So Turn towards your left knee. Oh, left knee, sorry. Straighten your back and just bend at the waist. You can put your hands down to support you. It's okay. Just stretch out, keeping your back straight over your left knee, and notice where the stretch is in your hips and maybe in your knees as well. And gently put yourself up. Then the other side, face your right knee. Stretch out, keep your back straight, as though you're sitting zazen and just bending, hinging at the waist. All right, straighten up. Okay. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions about any of all that stuff that just happened? So anything jump out at you from the Fukan Zazengi? Anything happen with respect to your sitting? Any questions about the particular technique we were using, or the technique in general, the breath stuff? Any questions about any of that? Yeah, go ahead.
I think several places I heard references to dragons and elephants. What's the significance?
Great. So dragons and elephants represent two sort of aspects of practice in monastic life and so on and so forth, right? I mean, the dragon as far as I know, in Chinese culture, represents this sort of energy and flow, fluid flow, either water or air, right? And moves freely through all of those media, right? And so Dogen says when the heart of zazen is grasped, you're like a dragon taking to the water, right? Just flowing freely with the water, right? And then elephants are so he quotes this story about the wise blind men groping for the elephant, right? So that's a folk story that goes way back, and oddly enough, I think shows up in a lot of places, but certainly it shows up showed up in Song Dynasty Chán because he quoted it, right? The idea behind the whole groping for the elephant things, you have a bunch of blind guys around an elephant. I've seen lots and lots of renderings of this, and they're often quite funny, right? So one of them is grabbing the trunk, and it's saying, it's like long and skinny and squiggly and kind of flexible like a snake. And another one is grabbing its tail and saying, it feels like a piece of rope, we could climb it, and et cetera. Like, so people are confused about the nature of the elephant, right? So that's the story he quotes. But in various places in the ceremonial liturgy, for example, there's a ceremony that you go through when you're essentially when you've done this ceremonial thing, which allows you to teach, right? And in the and what it involves is a lot of really difficult Q&A. You have like as much as 75 people sitting out in the audience, and each one of them gets to ask you an impossible question, right? And you have to answer them all instantly without hesitation and as wholeheartedly as you possibly can. It's a wonderful ceremony. But what you do to encourage them is you say, dragons and elephants, let's bring forth the Dharma, right? So the dragon part is what I said. The elephant, it's like the elephant is solid, hardworking, and kind of, and I think, solid, hardworking, and diligent, right? And that's the other aspect of monastic practice, is this kind of diligence, and ever since the early Tang Dynasty, monasteries in China were pretty much self-supporting, not completely. Obviously, they needed donations and so on and so forth. But in terms of the everyday life, the monks did all the work of taking care of each other, growing food if they did it, cooking the food, cleaning, all the rest of that sort of thing, right? And that work practice became a sort of necessary condition for the monastic forms in Zen monasteries in general, right? And so that's the elephant part, right? Good question. Anybody else?
At one point, is it like, I think he said, like, so let us cease practicing?
Yeah, what he said, let's see, what's he say? You should therefore cease from practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words, and following after speech, and learn the backward step that turns your light inwardly to illuminate the self. That's right. Right, and I think both in China and in Japan, the initial introduction of Buddhism, certainly in China, was basically people were going around and grabbing big piles of scrolls and throwing them into a basket and putting them on the back of a donkey and hauling them off to China or Central Asia, and having people sit down and translate them and then passing them around. And they were already starting up a kind of commentarial literature and so on and so forth, right? And it was really good, right? I mean, they were really studying the Dharma in the sense of learning the conceptual framework that supports and helps us grapple with what it is to be human, and what it is to practice with that, right? But the Zen school, one of the primary axioms of the Zen school, there's only two, fortunately, but is that all the transmit, I'm going to talk about this a bit later, but all the transmission of significance of the Dharma happens in the context of relationships, either between people or between people and other beings or between people and things, basically. And so it's all about the relationships, right? The other axiom is you study the mind, basically, right? Study in intimate detail the workings of the mind. But so the idea is to turn towards that practice, the practice that it's not like you shouldn't study. All these people knew the whole Mahayana canon, and by the middle of Dogen's life, he also had been exposed to the Pali Canon, the other big canonical framework that was current in the Buddhist world, or one of the others. And and so he studied a lot and he knew this stuff inside and out, but he insists that the actual practice of being awake has a different source, right? It's the backward step, basically, right? Anyway, something like that. Okay, well, so last week we started out this sort of Dharma talk portion of the Bendowa, and I'll just remind you what he says. He says, all Buddha Tathagatas who individually transmit inconceivable Dharma, actualizing unsurpassable, complete enlightenment, have a wondrous art, supreme and unconditioned, and receptive samadhi is its mark. And we talked about receptive samadhi. It's in Japanese, Jiju Zanmai, and it's a perhaps better translation would be self-enjoying samadhi, right? And that it essentially is the practice of intimate, continuous self-study, and in the context of that self-study, allowing this sort of other mode of being that surrounds our sort of everyday cognitive faculty to come into view and take its natural place in our everyday life, basically, thereby doing a couple of things, acting as a sort of counterweight to our habitual cognitive tendencies to grasp and avert, to think categorically, and so on and so forth, right? And think conditionally, always think in terms of preferences and so on, right? It acts as a counterweight to that, and it also opens the mind and body to the possibility of experiences that are literally mind-bending, right? So that was his first thing, and then he says this. He says, only Buddhas transmit it to Buddhas without veering off. That's what he says. So in other words, they have a wondrous art, supreme and unconditioned. Receptive samadhi is its mark, and only Buddhas transmit it to Buddhas without veering off. So I think we talked about this a little bit before in the sort of the Mahayana, the sort of the ideas about liberation in Mahayana Buddhism are underscored mostly with this idea that the Buddha's mind, this mind that he's talking about, the mind that has this wondrous, that is awakened in all these hyperbolically described ways, and had their minds have this wondrous art, and the art of receptive samadhi. That mind has been transmitted person to person, teacher to student, and so on and so forth, down through the ages, so that it's present right now in, Dōgen might be hinting that maybe it's present in him, but in any case, it's present in the world, right? And you can benefit from it. So only Buddhas to Buddhas. So what that means is there's been this lineage of teacher to student transmission that in a Zen temple you chant it almost every day, right? Not as part of some ceremonial thing, right? Or at least you sketch it out. Sometimes you only name some of the beings on it, but for the most part, you chant it every day. And when you're getting Dharma transmission, you have to, well, at least when I was getting Dharma transition, I had to do a ceremony, a very long, complicated ceremony that involved lighting incense and chanting the list of the Buddhas and ancestors. And there's also a list of female ancestors. So it's a lot, right? All the generations since 500 BC up till now, plus some other ones, right? That were added on, and you have to light incense and bow and ring a bell and do all sorts of other stuff in between each one, right? And it really, we did it. The woman and I that were getting Dharma transmission together did it 3 times a day, and we started out. It took like an hour and a half or more, almost 2 hours to do the whole thing. By the time we were done, we could do, each one was taking us 40 minutes because we were doing it really kind of intensely. Right? But in any case, that lineage is sort of drilled into your body and mind by the time you're done with your monastic training. And what Dogen is saying is that every single person in that lineage was a Buddha, right? And so what does that imply, actually? What it implies is that we're all Buddhas, right? And, well, he digs into this a little bit more later, but it's worth asking, like, okay, so let's say you have a teacher and a student, and the presumption is that the teacher has been transformed in some way, and it's funny. I was just reading a very short sutra, which is one of the earliest known Buddhist documents, right? That was pulled out of a jar in Gandhara or Pakistan, basically, and it's the crux of the plot of the sutra is that this Brahmin is walking down the street, and he walks by the Buddha, and the Buddha is sitting under a tree, and he says, "Hey, you look really great. Are you a god?" And the Buddha goes, "No, I'm not a god." And then he says, "Okay, well, are you this kind of nature spirit?" And the Buddha goes, "No, I'm not that." And he says, "Are you this other kind of spirit?" And he goes, "No, I'm not that." And then he says, "Well, are you human?" And the Buddha goes, "No, I'm not human either." And then he goes, "Okay, what are you?" And he says, "Well, I'm a Buddha," right? So the at least in the canonical framework of that time, the Buddha was essentially transhuman, right? And it's not totally clear that idea continued to percolate through Chinese Buddhism and Japanese Zen and so on and so forth. But in any case, the idea is that the way a Buddha engages with the world and responds is very different from the way normal people do it, right? And so you have this teacher that's like that, right? And you have this student, and the idea is that the teacher transmits, well, the way you think, listening to the word transmission, you somehow manages to transmit this Buddha-ness to the student. But actually, that's not how it works at all, right? What really goes on is their Dharma transmission down through the years has been this sort of growing act of mutual recognition in which the teacher recognizes something in the student and the student recognizes the same thing in the teacher, and they help each other bring that up together, basically. And what they're bringing up together, again, is this wondrous art of receptive samadhi, right? How to practice so as to live differently in in the world in the presence of the human condition, right? That's really what it's about. So right. So he says, this, he's saying this is what, it's essentially saying this is what gets transmitted. Sitting upright, practicing Zen is the authentic gate to free yourself from in the unconfined realm of this samadhi. So the practice, first of all, of doing this while seated, and second of all, doing it all day long, right, is what is transmitted. And the implication there is interesting. It's like I think I've probably told this already, but my family was involved in, because I grew up in Marin, and we knew the Wattses, and we knew Bill Kwong and all these other people who were the sort of early movers in the advent of Buddhism to the West, capital T, capital W, right? They would sit, my parents and their friends would sit around all day and talk about enlightenment. And there was this idea that there was there was some state that you could attain and like grasp and hold on to for the rest of your life that would fix it so that you'd never have to worry about being human ever again, right? Because it would be just, a piece of cake, basically. And if you read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is, so my mom studied with Suzuki Roshi, the guy that wrote Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And he works really hard to dispel that view, right? And to make it clear that being awake is a continuous practice, and the idea is that what gets transmitted is the ins and outs and the way of being in this continuous practice of being awake, basically, right? And then he says this. He says, although this inconceivable dharma is abundant in each person, again, so that's basically, he's saying, although everyone's a Buddha, it's not actualized without practice, and it's not experienced without realization, right? And you know I've raised this before, I think maybe in the first class, when I was talking about Dōgen and the question that drove his pursuit of Zen and his going off to China to study with Chinese Zen teachers and so on and so forth. And what he said was, as I study both the esoteric, this is when he was still a Tendai monk in Kyoto, right? As I study both the esoteric and exoteric schools of Buddhism, they maintain that human beings are endowed with, I can't read this, Dharma nature by birth. If this is the case, why did the Buddhas of all ages, undoubtedly in possession of enlightenment, find it necessary to seek enlightenment and to engage in spiritual practice, right? So he's answered the question for himself now, right? He's saying, it is the practice. That's the point, right? And that being awake is in fact a continuous practice. And there are ways of thinking about it that feel modal in the sense that, again, people often talk about, Suzuki Roshi talked about small-minded, big mind, and Dongshan, the founder of this Zen school, the one that I'm a part of, talked about these two modes of being that he named the straight and the crooked, or the upright and the leaning, basically, right? Because that's a useful formalism to help explain the personal experience of practice. But fundamentally, there's no duality, right? And fundamentally, those ideas about modes and so on are they're just that. They're just ideas. They're provisional, and the actual act of being in the middle of the human condition and working with it goes beyond all of that, basically. So he says, when you release it, it fills your hand. How could it be limited to one or many? When you speak it, it fills your mouth. It's not bounded by length or width. Right? There's this idea, I think, particularly in Chinese Buddhism in general and in Zen, about measurement and calculation, right? So, there are these four attributes that are in Sanskrit are called the Brahma Viharas, right? And they're loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, right? So, what is that? Metta, mudita, I forget. Anyway. And in Sanskrit, they're called the abodes of Brahma, right? The Brahma Viharas. Right? It's like, where Brahma lives. Interestingly, in Chinese, they're called the four measureless minds, right? And furthermore, when in the Chinese version of the Bodhisattva vow, the same character is used in the vow that says, "Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them," right? Which is the idea is that measurement and calculation are pretty much the enemy of fruitful practice. Right? So, and Suzuki Roshi says this too. He says, here's the thing that's hard about Zen practice. It's not hard because it's hard to sit zazen. Everybody can find a position that they can sit in, right? And it's not hard even because it's hard to kind of start having these experiences of being awake, or having our experience of life be different, or feel more vital, or any of those other things. It's not, none of that stuff is hard. What's hard is to keep from measuring it and drawing conclusions based on your measurement of whether your practice is good or bad, or better than theirs, or worse than theirs, or whatever. All these things, right? It's the single hardest thing about spiritual practice in general, and certainly about Zen practice, right? And so, for example, the four Brahma Viharas, metta is the loving kindness. In other words, it's unconditioned love and kindness, right? Compassion is compassionate feeling without expectation or transaction, right? Mudita is sympathetic joy. It's joy in everyone's joy, not just yours, and not just the people that you want to be joyful, right? Etc. Right? So. And go ahead. Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
So even though the practice is appearing to be very deeply introspective, yet the four boundless minds, the four attributes that you're describing, have to do with relations with other people. Absolutely, that's right, and that's exactly correct, right? Like if
if this stuff just made you feel good and then you went on being, abrasive and difficult for everybody, then it would never have, like if the Buddha said, I know there's this practice you can do, it makes you feel just fabulous. And you can go on being a jerk to everyone, right? Everyone, all of his followers would have gone, okay, I'm out of here. And that would have been the end. No, it's exactly right. Each of these immeasurable or measureless minds has a inner component and an outer component, right? So to experience sympathetic joy means to tap into this sort of unconditioned appreciation that's the sort of baseline of practice. And so that's the inner part, and the outer part is how that affects behavior and how that affects your relationships with other beings, including people, but also including dogs, cats, cows. They do a lot of talking about cats and cows oddly in the Chinese literature. I'm not really sure why. But I just got finished reading something with a Dogen study group where they're talking about cats and cows for paragraph after paragraph. But anyway, yes, exactly.
Only to what it's like, let's see, it could be the case that they're saying like practice sitting because it will help cultivate these relational properties. But like, how blasphemous is it to never sit if someone's doing really good? Or is finding it like it's only walking meditation or something?
Well, no. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, right? I mean, it's worth raising. Dogen in the Bendowa, right, he's delivering a manifesto, and he's basically saying, if you really want to, if you really want to explore this territory, seated meditation is a time-honored methodology for exploring it, right? Is it the only methodology? No, of course not. Of course it's not.
So
Right.
when you framed it as like there's two axioms or whatever, and one is like just sitting, like I'm hearing like something like just sitting.
Right. So strictly speaking, I think the axioms are transmission happens in relationships, one, and the other one is the work is studying the mind, right? And the implication that Dogen's making is that the best way to do that is sitting zazen, right? But like I used to know this group. They used to be on. I was talking about the Buddhist bike pilgrimage. They used to be on the Buddhist bike pilgrimage. They're not anymore because their abbess, this really incredibly great, I think Burmese woman. Her name was Madame Teen, but she retired, and they're kind of trying to figure out what to do, but she completely ignores seated meditation as a practice. But you better believe that her monks are practicing like crazy, right? They're doing the same stuff, but they're doing it standing up and walking around, basically. And she's pretty good at it. And the only story I'll tell you about her is that one time we went through their place on the Buddhist bike pilgrimage, and it was raining cats and dogs, but she came out and she gave a talk. We sat in a tent, right, on a slab of concrete in the rain, and as the talk went on and on and on and on, the water rose to where we were all sitting in this like shallow bath of very, very cold water, and we all just sat there and listened, and some of us shivered, and then she just got up and walked off. I mean, she was serious, right? And and felt that for a lot of people, seated meditation is distractingly difficult, and you can do it without, right? So anyway, something like that. Anything else? Yeah, of course.
So you said that Zen did away with the transhuman aspect of Buddha. So it got me wondering what makes Zen a religion. So I guess the underlying question is, how does Zen, define religion rather than, say, a philosophy,
Yeah,
discipline,
it's a great question.
lifestyle, or does it even care?
Well, here's what I'd say about that. My personal experience with that. So yeah, all Buddhist schools have a huge philosophical footprint and body of knowledge, right? I think I mentioned this, the Pali Canon of the Theravadan school fills a 5 foot wide, 8 foot tall bookshelf, right? And it's a lot of stuff, right? And the Zen school has the koan literature. You could probably print it all in reasonable sized books and have it stack up to there, right? But that's a lot, right? And a lot of it is philosophical in nature and maybe historical in nature, and then there's a bit that's just about the nature of the practice, like the yoga of it, right? The thing that makes Zen Buddhism a religion has to do with faith, right? That you have to be willing to completely give over your body and mind to a practice that initially feels like it's not going to do anything worthwhile at all, right? And that's the religious part, right? Dogen's metaphysics is not really in this document. He had a pretty highly developed metaphysics, right? In the sense of talking about the sort of cosmic footprint of practice and so on, right? He says, sitting is like a hammer striking emptiness. Its exquisite peal continues forever, right? And he's not kidding. He's not just being poetical. He believed that stuff, right? But the main thing is not, the main religious aspect of it is not so much metaphysical as it is, it's about faith and and a kind of faith-based dedication to practice that allows you to, again, do all the stuff that your practice asks of you in a way that's completely non-transactional, right? Anyway, something like that. But it's a really good question. And, there's a whole cohort of people who insist that Zen isn't a religion, right? But I'm pretty sure it is, and it has to do with faith, basically. Yeah.
What if you don't have it? What if you do this because you find out that you live better and can function more smartly, but without faith? I don't feel like that's something that's in me.
Yeah, I think that's good, right? It's great to practice and see the fruits of practice in your life, right? my experience with monastic living is that it's sufficiently difficult and discombobulating that you eventually run through your appreciation of the fruits of practice, and you need faith to stick with it, basically. But you know, it is really true that this stuff does show up in your life when you do it. So, and that's worth noticing and celebrating. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, but yes, for me, you know, the human mind is capable of making a catastrophe out of just about anything, right? And eventually, I think most people that do monastic practice will tell you a story about how at some point their mind made a catastrophe out of everything, and they just needed to hold on, basically, right? So let's see, we got a little bit. Anything else? It's good. So this is just this is the last part of this. Well, it's the last part of the section that we're going to read anyway. It says, all Buddhas continuously abide in this Dharma and do not leave traces of consciousness about where they are. Sentient beings, and remember, we're all Buddhas and we're all sentient beings, okay? Sentient beings continuously move around in this Dharma, but where they are is not clear in their consciousness, right? So this holds up this relationship between these two modes that we're talking about. When you're really all the way in the mode of bare, unconditioned, unconstructed attention, there are no markers, right? And there's no calculator, right? When you're on the other side, and we're always moving around between those two, right? That other mode is still there. It's just we're not clear on it, and we're mostly tangled up in some skein of thought and habitual response to the causes and conditions of the world, right? So there's a koan about that I thought I'd recite and then talk about a little bit, and I also wrote a poem for it, so I'll read you the poem too. But the koan goes like this. So Jiaozhou, who's one of the most famous Tang Dynasty Zen masters, is quoting this document that talks about the thing we were talking about earlier. It says, this stuff is easy, just avoid choosing. And then he says, but the minute you open your mouth, you're saying things like, this is clarity, this is picking and choosing, right? And he says, as a result, I've found personally that I can't remain in clarity. Clarity comes and goes. So what can you preserve? That's what he said. And at that time, a monk gets up and goes, oh, so what do you preserve? And Jiaozhou goes, I don't really know either. And then this monk says, aha, you say you don't know. Why then? Why are you saying you're not clear on it? And Jiaozhou goes, to ask the question is to be rewarded. Now go sit down. And that's the end of the exchange. But you can see where that's going, right? Like we live our life whether we know it or not, and particularly we live a life of practice in this tangle between our mode of conventional thinking and acting and our categorical tendencies, our tendencies to grasp after things, to et cetera, and this other mode that isn't really concerned with those things and kind of has a baseline of unconditioned appreciation for just the fact of being alive, right? And initially, one is not visible from the other, and over time, that barrier kind of fuzzes out and breaks down, and they're both kind of present, right? And it's possible to move back and forth depending on the requirements of the moment. If you're having to talk, then you're essentially choosing things, right? If you don't have to talk, there are a lot more other possibilities, right? So here's the poem. Where the mountains part and reveal the sea, the trail twists like its life depends upon it. A cloud of birds around my head, illuminating the actual shape of space. So, thanks. I guess before we go, any other questions? Excellent. Well, have a great day. Oh, great. Thank you.